Warning: the following video contains sensitive content regarding child loss and other motherhood topics that is not suitable for children under 18 and may not be suitable for certain audiences. Viewer discretion advised. Right.
I love this angle for me. Rocking the double chin. Oh my gosh.
I like it. The double chin has many stories to tell. That's
Yeah. I didn't have a double chin until I got pregnant, man.
right.
And it just out of nowhere came, and I'm like, no, go back. At one point in my life, I was skinny.
Welcome back to our channel. My name is Brianna.
My name is Kelsi.
And today we are discussing Kelsi's story. So, what you got for us?
So my story starts all the way back in 2014-ish, 2015. I'm not really 100% sure. A lot of that time is really fuzzy for me just due to trauma and all kinds of fun stuff going on in my life at the time. I had 4 or 5 miscarriages. I'm not really sure the actual amount. But in 2016, I met my husband in person. Immediately, we were like, yeah, we both want a family. His best friend's wife was pregnant at the time. It gave him baby fever really bad. So he really, really wanted a family. And I was okay with it. I was over heels in love with him. Still am. But he and I immediately started trying. Within a couple months of starting to date, I do not advise that. It worked out really well for me. It doesn't work out for many people. I gave birth in 2018 to my oldest. His name is Preston. He is 5 now. He is one of the lights of my life. He's rambunctious. 11 months later, I gave birth to Logan. We basically immediately started trying for another baby because we wanted to have 2 really close together and be done. And his pregnancy was awful. It was absolutely awful. With my oldest, I had something called IUGR, which is intrauterine growth restriction. It's when the baby is born underneath the 10th percentile or falls underneath the 10th percentile at any point throughout the pregnancy. He had that. He was 5 pounds 9 ounces when he was born. He was born very healthy, fortunately, because there are some nasty outcomes that can happen. My second son, we were monitoring it very, very closely because of the IUGR. He came out at 5 pounds 13 ounces, so he was on the line of IUGR, but not quite. He wasn't considered it. At the beginning of 2020, we got pregnant again. And unfortunately lost that one. That hit us harder than we thought it would. So we ended up deciding, you know what, we'll have one more. It'll be fine. One more won't hurt. We had 2 more losses that year, and then at the tail end of 2020, we conceived Jensen. And Jensen was a picture perfect pregnancy for me. And then at 33 weeks and 3 days, I noticed his movements were different. They were a lot calmer. He was very much a mover and a groover. He did not like to stay still. He was always moving. There was never any lulls in his movement. And the movement felt very, very sluggish, very slow, not quite right. I did a kick count like I was instructed, and nobody had ever stopped to explain that you need to look for differences in the type of movement as well. Not just if you hit 10 movements in 1 hour, you're good. Well, I did hit 10 movements in 1 hour, but it took that whole hour to get it. And it took us playing music. It took me jiggling my belly, drinking something cold. I should have gone in. I did not know that I needed to. The next morning, I woke up and there was no movement at all. It took me a little while to realize because I had a 1 and a 2-year-old at the time. Yeah, 1 and a 2-year-old at the time. So everything was really chaotic. We had just moved. My husband's in the military. And so we had moved from Fort Riley, Kansas to Fort Carson, Colorado. I just a couple days prior had my first OB appointment with this new OB. Now everything was looking good. We had a growth scan. He looked fine. So I didn't know what to do. And I didn't notice at first. I didn't really notice that Jensen wasn't moving all that much because my life was very chaotic, just as a general rule. We didn't really notice. And then by about 9 a.m., I noticed something was off. I had a sinking feeling in my gut. And so I did a kick count and he failed. Obviously, he wasn't moving at all. So I tried the things that I knew he liked. I took a hot shower. I went and sat outside in the sun with my belly exposed. Those were things that would get him moving, would get him, would wake him up if he had those rare moments where he was asleep, and nothing worked. So at about 11 o'clock, I called my husband. I was like, you need to come home. I can't take the boys with me to the hospital. I need to go in. It's probably nothing. I'd gone in already at one point back at like 22, 23 weeks because Jensen was a mover and he had stopped and it was just nothing. So in my head, I'm like, oh, it's probably nothing. He's probably just having a sleepy day or run out of room or something. So my husband had to fight with his command, but was able to come home. I got to the hospital at 1 p.m. They brought me back, hooked me up, and they couldn't find his heart on the little monitor. Again, not outside the ordinary. He did not like to be monitored. So we just were like, okay, this is pretty normal. I thought I had felt a couple of movements. Then they brought in the ultrasound, and I'm making small talk. We did not know the gender of our baby. We were going to leave that a surprise. Well, she walked out, and I'm still blissfully unaware. You know, everything in my head is everything's fine. Then the doctor comes in with the ultrasound tech, and they have this look on their face. And it's a look I will never forget, but I don't think I could explain. The doctor came in, held my hand, and was like, I'm so sorry to have to tell you this, but your baby has no heartbeat. And at first, I didn't believe it. I was very much like, no, that's not possible. This kind of stuff doesn't happen. Not to me. This wouldn't happen to me. And so they brought in the ultrasound again and showed me. The ultrasound tech in that second ultrasound also asked if I wanted to know if Jensen was a boy or a girl. And I said yes. And so she told me that Jensen was a he. I'm extremely thankful for that. Then the doctor came in and was like, I want you to know that these kinds of things happen. It is not your fault. And that is what she said when she came in for the second time. She was so compassionate. But it was like, I was reading through your file and I noticed you had some birth trauma. You are not showing any signs of labor at all. I don't want to put you through that. This could take several days. Do you want a C-section? And I said yes. That was one of the best things I'd ever done. I don't think I could have gone through labor with Jensen at all. I don't think I could have stomached it. And I did a natural labor previously. I did have 2 inductions, but I did the first one without pain management. And that's what I was trying to do again, because epidurals don't work very well for me. And I didn't want to go through that to not have a baby to take home at the end. And I love that the doctor gave me that option. I've talked to several people who didn't feel like they had that option. And you always have that option. You can always, say, hey, I don't want to do this. Let's do a C-section. Mental distress is enough of a reason. It's enough of a justification. And if a doctor fights you on it, ask for a different doctor or wait for shift change. But I was allowed a C-section. I was so dehydrated though, and so much in shock that it took another 6 hours to place an IV. It was insane. One of the other things I'll never forget is I held my composure pretty well, I'd say. I didn't cry. I didn't scream, nothing like that. And then I called my husband, who was home with the boys. And when he answered, I lost it. I just started like this scream crying. And I couldn't get it together, and he knew something had happened. He called his chaplain. His chaplain came and watched the kids, and he took off. I'm pretty sure he broke several laws, probably committed a felony to get there, but he got there. He came in, and by the look on my face, he gathered what had happened. I don't think I'd ever actually told him Jensen had died. I think he kind of figured the worst had happened. especially when he walked in and a nurse is holding my hand. And I'm not a touchy-feely my close friends describe me as a cactus. Don't touch me. And I was letting a complete stranger hold my hand and talk to me while they were trying to get an IV. I did, however, scar the nurse. She was very sweet. She took it in stride, but I'm pretty sure I scarred her. She was telling me bad jokes when they were poking me, trying to distract me, and I dead ass looked at her at one point and went, "Is it too early for dead baby jokes?"
Oh,
I feel bad.
did it take her by surprise?
A little bit. You could tell. I came back later and gave her a gift, like a Starbucks gift card, and I'm so sorry. She's like, "No, no, you're fine." We see that a lot. Dark humor is a way people use to cope and everything like that. But yeah, so they finally put the central line in my neck. So eventually we got me into the OR, and Jensen was born at 9:15 p.m. I was put into like the twilight anesthesia. I was awake. I had a spinal, but I don't remember anything. That was wonderful, wonderful. They basically, as soon as they got the IV in and got my spinal placed, pushed the sleep drugs and pushed anti-anxiety and all of the feel-good drugs that they could think of to try to help me. They got Jensen out very quickly. They did attempt to resuscitate, but obviously it was unsuccessful. He had already passed. I think it was more of a courtesy than anything else. They spent another 45 minutes stitching me up. They took so much time and so much care. It was wonderful. The doctor who did my surgery actually stayed back past the end of her shift. So Jensen passed due to severe IUGR and what they believe was undiagnosed preeclampsia. They had mismeasured prior. I had just had a growth scan 3 days before Jensen died. They had mismeasured him by 1.5 pounds. They bent the rules to allow me to stay in the hospital for 5 days. And we had a cuddle cot, and we got to spend a lot of time with Jensen. I got to do a lot of skin to skin. We got to bring in our own clothes, my own stuff. It was really nice. My 2 best friends got there in about 6 hours. They bent the rules to allow me to have multiple people. They let my boys come in even though they weren't supposed to. Everything was really great. We got a lot of pictures. It's very surreal. It's very, very surreal. Because on one hand, this is the most perfect things you'd ever see. They're absolutely gorgeous. And then on the other hand, there's such a heavy sadness that comes with it. And the room is cold because of the cuddle cot. And it feels like that cold is just heavy and sits on your chest. Him and I cuddled a lot, though. I spent a lot of time just holding him and being with him. There was also a sense of urgency because you know that that's the only time you're going to get. So they were able to keep him in the room with me for my entire stay. And he was very loved. We got to put him in our own clothes, wrap him up in a blanket I had literally just finished for him because I crochet. But yeah, the best way I could describe it is surreal. It feels like you're living a dream that is almost a nightmare, but it isn't, because on one hand, it's the worst time of your life, but on the other hand, it's cherished time. I hope that makes sense.
It does. It does. And I'm asking because for people who have never gone through this or never have experienced this, the one thing that they will never understand, and I'm talking about the people who, you know, question why we carry our children who are no longer alive.
There's a lot of people who question why you would spend a lot of time, and this is going to sound harsh, but why you would spend so much time with a dead body. At the end of the day, you don't get any time with that person. When you think of an adult who's passed on, like your grandfather, you have memories, you have time, you have bits and pieces where you got to touch them and hug them and cuddle with them. Or even if you're not on that level, you have memories with them. You got to hear them laugh and see them smile. We don't get that. You only have a little bit of time where you can make those memories. You don't get to do that golden hour, the skin to skin to breastfeed. So you take what you can get. You take those moments cuddling your baby. It is the strangest thing. By definition, they are a corpse at that point. But when you're holding your baby in that moment, they're not. They're your baby. They're not. It doesn't even register that they're really not alive because they're there with you. You're with them. You're trying to make a lifetime of memories in a couple days. It's really hard for someone who only can look at loss through someone who's not a child passing.
Yeah.
It's really hard for them to look at somebody who has a framed picture of their child who at the point of the photo being taken was dead and understand that, because it would never cross their mind to take a picture of their dead grandfather. But because you have pictures of your grandfather while he was alive.
Yeah.
We don't get that luxury when they've passed. When you have a stillbirth or a child that passes very soon after birth, all your photos are either of your child after they've passed, or if they are alive, they've got the tubes and all of the stuff keeping them alive. And those are painful. It's even painful to look at those photos when your child lives through the NICU.
Mm-hmm.
We have to make as many memories as quick as possible because it is hard to explain the sheer tragedy and the sheer personal loss that is a life that ends before it can even begin. Because sure, I have memories of being pregnant with Jensen, and I hold those memories very fondly, but they're not the same as having memories with Jensen. That, at the end of the day, Jensen is just as much as my baby as Preston or Logan. And if I'm going to show off Preston and Logan, I'm going to show off Jensen too. I still carried him. I still birthed him. I still did everything in my power to make sure he was loved and had a good time on earth. And it's hard for someone else, someone who hasn't gone through it, to understand it.
Yeah, exactly.
Simultaneously, those couple days with Jensen are the worst and the best time of my life.
I read this quote that said, the year that your child was born was the best year of your life, but also the worst because you had to say both hello and goodbye to them.
Yeah. The first couple were hard. The first couple had me questioning, especially with Tim, my husband. The first couple had me questioning if I even wanted to continue trying. But I got to a point, as callous as it is, that it got to a moment where I would have a miscarriage and I'd be just like, God damn it, another one? Mm-hmm. Are we kidding? Just because they happened so much. Most of my pregnancies ended in miscarriage.
Did they ever find a reason for that happening?
They believe it's because I have what's called a retroverted uterus. My uterus tilts backwards in my pelvis. Mm-hmm. And because of that, I have scar tissue where my uterus would curve basically, and the egg would try to implant in that scar tissue and not be able to implant. So Jensen was actually cremated in the blanket that I brought to the hospital. It's what I had just finished. And it gave me a lot of comfort. And I had someone comment on my one of my pictures a year after he passed, mentioning how he was wrapped up in his mama's love forever because he was cremated in the blanket I made him. That comment still gets me. I love it. So I love that idea so much. But I was like realizing that we don't get a lot of keepsakes from our babies. Like we get the handprints and the footprints and sometimes the clothes they wear, stuff like that, but we don't get a lot of like tangible things you can cuddle.
Mm-hmm.
And I stole some of the hospital blankets from Jensen, like
Mm-hmm.
some of the hospital blankets he was swaddled up in. Since he got cremated in the blanket I made him, but I realized that I I wasn't planning on having a baby anytime soon. And I had a bunch of baby blankets that were basically sitting unused in my closet. Well, I got the idea when I saw another army wife post on the page about how she was about to go to the hospital to deliver her baby stillborn, asking what she could bring. And I messaged her being like, hey, I have a blanket, a handmade blanket, if you want it, so you can have something to wrap your baby in to keep. And she accepted. She reached out a couple weeks later, thanking me, telling me that having this blanket had helped her quite a bit. And it kind of snowballed from there into me going into hospitals being like, hey, I have these blankets. I want you to give them specifically to lost moms. I also pumped after Jensen. And that was also quite healing. I pumped and donated to a local NICU. Actually, ironically, the NICU my babies went to. I got to go in there and be like, hey, I donated milk here. And then my twins needed donated milk because I didn't have a supply at first, thanks to
Mm-hmm.
HELLP syndrome. I have to pump after I give birth. I don't have much of another choice. I'll get mastitis, I'll get all kinds of nasty things.
Yeah.
Even with my second baby, who I did not want to breastfeed, I had to pump a little bit to make sure I didn't get mastitis. So after Jensen, I had to do that. I had no choice. Although, let's be real, milk coming in after a child dies is feels like the universe's sickest joke. It feels like a cruel prank. It's awful.
Yeah.
So I ended up pumping and donating for 4 weeks. And then I got jewelry made. It has rainbow flecks because Jensen was my rainbow baby. It has his ashes and it has milk that I expressed. And it's one of my most cherished possessions. I don't wear it very much because I don't want anything to happen with it, but I love it so much. So after Jensen, I went on birth control because we did not want to have another baby. And in October, November timeframe, like the tail end of October, beginning of November, I started feeling funny. So I took a pregnancy test. Actually, I took a lot of pregnancy tests. Probably somewhere around 2 or 3 dozen pregnancy tests. And I was pregnant again. And I was terrified, but overall I was happy. Everything looked good. I got an ultrasound with a heartbeat. I was feeling confident that I was going to get another baby. We sent off blood for the NIPS test, everything like that. Well, Thanksgiving Day, we were driving up to my in-laws' house. They live in Idaho. They're about a 10-hour drive. And we were driving up, and I felt like gas pains. So I had to pull over. I went to the bathroom, and it was just red. Bright red, horrible. I get out to the truck, and it's like, we're going to have to go to the hospital. We get to the hospital. They can't explain my bleeding. However, the baby still had a heartbeat. So they are like, you're a threatened miscarriage. Don't move too much. Don't be gentle with yourself. And that was kind of what we did. And I ended up going to the ER another time on that trip. We told my in-laws I was pregnant again. After I got back to Colorado, I made an appointment with my OB. But the night before I was supposed to have that appointment, I was in pain. It literally felt like someone was reaching in, grabbing something and yanking on it, like pulling it out of my body. So I went into the ER. I could not handle the pain. So I went in and they did an ultrasound and they found out I was actively hemorrhaging into my uterus. I had the big long word for
Chorionic
the,
hemorrhage.
yes, those, I cannot pronounce them. I had 7 that they could see. They believed that several of them had joined together, and they believe I had an active bleed in my uterus. And so they sat me down and they told me I had a couple options. We could wait to see if my body miscarried on its own, but the baby still had a heartbeat, so they didn't know if I would. And I would have to be in the hospital till I miscarried. There was a small inkling, like a tiny, like 1% chance that I would just be constantly bleeding through pregnancy and be hospitalized the entire time and give birth to a child. But that was such a small possibility that it wasn't even worth like looking into. So we could wait for my body to miscarry on its own, and potentially risk me bleeding out, or I could terminate. And in that moment, as much as I hated the concept, as much as I didn't want to do it, as much as I wanted this baby so desperately, I had to terminate. I couldn't run the risk of dying. I had 2 babies at home that needed me. As much as I wanted to go see my baby, it wasn't my time. And I wasn't going to just roll over and go without a fight. So we had to terminate. I was too far. I was about 8 weeks pregnant. I was too far for them to do the medication. So I had to have a procedural abortion. And it tore me. It destroyed me. I told people I'd had a miscarriage because it was easier. Because making that choice, even though I stand by that decision, making that choice was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. There's so much controversy around medical termination. There's so much like, oh, I would never do that. And you really don't know. You don't know you would never do that until you're actively in that moment deciding if you or your baby is going to live. Like, am I going to risk my life for the slight possibility of having a live child at the end of this? Or am I going to take the necessary steps to preserve my life for the children I have? And for my husband, because my husband would be a complete wreck without me. But making that decision holds such a strong feeling of regret and grief. And it's just not talked about, and it's demonized. And unless you're sitting there making the decision between you or your child, unless you are sitting there being like, if I continue this pregnancy, I'm going to die, you have no right. You have no inkling of a damn clue what that choice is. How emotionally devastating being in that room with your doctor, hearing it's you or the baby you have to pick. I have such strong feelings about this because I was so ashamed of the choice I made. I didn't even tell my husband. This man who has been with me through thick and thin, who literally saw me at my worst, who cradled our dead child with me. I couldn't even tell him because I was so ashamed. Because of the stigma that is around abortion and that there is no just reason. I had to work a lot in therapy and a lot on myself before I could even talk about it. And there still are people who don't know because I know they won't understand.
And so how did Tim react when have you told him?
I have told him.
Okay.
I sat down with him, was like, look, I've got a confession to make and I feel really bad for keeping this from you. Because it ate at me. It absolutely ate at me that I was not honest with him. I sat him down 4 months after it happened. He was about to deploy. I was like, look, I've not been completely honest because I didn't want to be honest with myself about this. And I told him, and he was hurt, rightfully so. He felt like I didn't trust him a little bit, rightfully so. And I don't blame him. I don't, but he understood where I was coming from. And he told me at the end of the day, I absolutely made the right choice because he could not see a world where he continued without me.
Well, and your children.
Yeah, my boys need their mom. They were 3 and 4 at the time. Tim was very hurt. And I don't know if the abortion led to fertility issues or not. I know that I did have some scar tissue after the fact. And he has a name. His name is Dean. And I think about him a lot. I think about what he would have been like. I would have had a second set of Irish twins. Realistically speaking, I should have six living kids, but I don't. It's just another grief I get to carry in this fun, fucked up world. After that pregnancy, I was on birth control. I did not want to get pregnant again. My husband was set to deploy. He deployed for 9 months. He left in April of 2022. And so he was set to come home in December. And towards August, I started gearing up to try again because we wanted another one, wanted at least one more baby. I was ovulating predictably while Tim was gone. Then he got home and I dead stopped. I would have my period without ovulating. So 2 months after he got home, so February, I went to my doctor. I was like, hey, what's going on? He was not on call, but they called him to see how to proceed because I was an interesting case. And he literally showed up. 20 minutes later, he was at the hospital. It wasn't even a hospital he had delivering privileges at. He's like, if you're going to do this, I'm going to do it with you. It was the best. I love that doctor. But I went to my doctor and was like, yo, I'm not ovulating. What's going on? And so we did blood work. We did the day 21 blood draw, stuff like that. And there was no evidence that my body was ovulating in any kind of predictable manner. And I was diagnosed with secondary infertility. I'd always been like fertile as hell. Like I was always like, I missed one pill, pregnant. Like just like that.
Tim looks at you.
Yeah.
Pregnant.
Now keeping them was a different story, but getting pregnant was always the easy part for me. And so to a point, it shattered my world. I was not able to get pregnant without medical help. And that was such a blow to my worth and such a blow to me as a person. So I ended up on Clomid. We did one medicated cycle where they took my blood, everything like that. And I ovulated exactly when they wanted me to. So that was March. April, I took it again. They're like, all right, if you don't get pregnant this cycle, we'll do one more. And if that one doesn't work, we're going to do more. And we'll talk about IUI. It's like one step down from IVF, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
I honestly didn't look that much into it because I was kind of like, all right, do whatever. Let's get this baby. So I was on Clomid and I took Clomid for the second cycle. Beginning of May, I learned I was pregnant. And immediately the tests were dark. Like I'm like 7 or 8 days post ovulation because I was still taking ovulation tests at home and I'm getting like a solid positive. I'm like, this is weird. And the tests just kept getting darker and darker and darker. By about 5 weeks pregnant, I got a dye stealer. And so I'm like, I'm kind of nervous now. I went into the ER because I was sicker than shit. I had HG again. And they took my blood and they're like, yeah, your HG says you're more like 7 or 8 weeks. And I was like 5 weeks at the time. And my HCG just kept rising like crazy. It wasn't more. So they were like, all right, we'll see you in a week. Come back in a week and we see one sac. So I'm like, okay, I'm just having a weird pregnancy. And the sac measures directly on time. I go back in a week later. And what they see on the ultrasound measures a week and a half behind where I was. And so I'm already prepping for the worst. They send us up to ultrasound and they're like, look, tell them you're lost, mom. Tell them you need in today. They'll get you. Like, okay, I'll hand this up. We got this. I took drama in high school. I got this. We get in there and we're talking to the ultrasound. I'm like, yeah, they're worried. They think I'm having a miscarriage. They can't see much. And she goes, yeah, they couldn't see much. Turns monitor, because you're having twins. And in that moment, I saw the 2 sacs on the monitor. It's like, oh my God. Tim about jumps over me to get as close to the monitor as he can to be like, whoa, like just to see it because he didn't believe it. And then he starts hugging me and like tearing. And I'm like, oh my, I'm still in shock. Like we are having 2 very different reactions. But yeah, so at 7 weeks pregnant, I found out I was having twins.
We all knew.
Yeah, the whole group was telling me this
knew.
twins.
Oh yeah.
Everybody. I was the only one that was surprised. Well, it's funny because I am a twin. So me having twins is a little on the rare side. It's possible because I'm a fraternal twin. But it was not expected. Clomid helped apparently.
Yeah. Clomid.
So Preston was also a twin. He had an identical twin. It was vanishing twin syndrome. So I was like, yeah, there's no way that'll happen to me twice, right? No way.
Yeah.
And so yeah, no, it was twins, and immediately I was considered high risk. You know, nothing like spicing up an already high risk pregnancy with twins.
Right.
It was severe. I was getting monthly ultrasounds by 20 weeks. We were doing growth scans. By 24 weeks, I was doing weekly scans. And then at 28 weeks, I was doing bi-weekly. I was doing BPP, biophysical profile, which is an ultrasound once a week, and I was doing a non-stress test once a week. And I did that for several weeks until 33 weeks showed up. Now, I was diagnosed with hyperemesis gravidarum, and I had gestational diabetes, are all things that are more common in twin pregnancies. But at 33 weeks, on the notes, I had been having heart problems the last previous weeks. My heart was basically just not wanting to work properly. Closer to 7 p.m., I stood up and passed out. I fell forward. My husband was standing playing video games, caught me, twisted me so I fell on my butt, not on my stomach, because I had just straight face planted. He called an ambulance. They brought me to one of the hospitals here, the one that was my maternal fetal medicine. They were super great. But I got this one nurse, and I'll never forget her. She just she had one of those faces that looked sweet and kind. You know what I mean? She just looked like a good person. And she sat down with me. She was doing my charting, and she asked how I'd been and how was twin pregnancy treating me. And everything just kind of fell out. The fact that I didn't think I could make it this far, that I had intrusive thoughts of sticking a knitting needle up my hoo-ha to break my water, all kinds of nasty things of wishing I would fall to induce labor. Not thoughts I was actively having, they were intrusive. Mm-hmm. And they're like, and I was honest. I was like, I can't convince myself that the babies are safer in than out. Especially because this was only 4 days gestation-wise prior to my previous loss. And so they pulled strings and got me admitted to the hospital. At first, I was admitted under mental health. But I mentioned I'd had a very mild headache. At max, it was a 4 on the pain scale. Tylenol took it down to a 2 or a 1. Very mild. And I had 2 at the time, a 5 and a 4-year-old. So I was like, I wrote it off as, I just have boys. I just have 2 little tiny headaches running around. We were going through a lot with Preston. He had just been diagnosed with ADHD and ODD, and they were pushing to get him screened for autism. And so there was just a lot going on. Well, they did a 24-hour urine, basically as a way to keep me in the hospital for a little while longer until the mental health was like, yeah, no, we're not letting her go. and had very mild preeclampsia. So they were doing blood work every 2 or 3 days. They were monitoring me, monitoring my blood pressures, all that fun stuff. I was doing twice daily non-stress tests, and I was getting a biophysical twice a week. Well, I was admitted to the hospital on a Saturday. The next Thursday, they came into my room and was like, yeah, so your liver enzymes are very, very high. We're going to keep watching them. And if they double again, or Friday night, they came in. I was like, your liver enzymes are very, very high. We're going to keep watching them. And if they double again, you're going to be having babies. The next morning, they took my blood and my liver enzymes had tripled. And they were about 7 times higher than they were supposed to be. They did a dipstick for protein in my urine, and they were apparently in a week, it had gone from mild preeclampsia to severe preeclampsia trending towards HELLP syndrome.
Wow. And that happened super fast.
Yeah. And the only symptom I ever had was a mild headache. I didn't have elevated blood pressures. I had very, very occasional pain underneath my ribs, but the mild headache was the only true symptom I had. And so Saturday morning, they're like, yep, we're taking babies. You're going to be put on MAG. We're calling it. These babies are getting taken out. I was 34 weeks on the nose. So Saturday, November 18th, 3:28 and 3:29, Mason and Maven were born. Or Mason cried right away. I bawled. Oh my God, I bawled. He was taken to the warmer. He had trouble breathing, so he had to be on CPAP. Maven, who came out a minute later, was apparently pissed. She was just straight up glaring at the entire team. How dare you take me out? And that is an energy that has still has. But she took a little while. And when she cried, she didn't cry. She yelled. She screamed. There was no crying involved. She was straight up just yelling at everybody. Again, something that still continues. But that moment where she was just silent, like staring at everybody, my heart dropped. I'm sitting there like on the table, like, oh God, is my baby dead? Nope, she was just stubborn and a little hot-headed, and again, still trans. She was born a redhead, so I'm not really surprised. They brought the babies over to me, and I won't say it healed me because it didn't. There is no healing from loss. But in that moment, all the hell I had gone through in this pregnancy was completely worth it. The HG, the gestational diabetes, the preeclampsia, the being away from my other 2 babies for a week in the hospital was suddenly so worth it. The relief that washed over me. I had spent the last 33 weeks, 34 weeks, so anxious that something would happen. And it was just done. My babies were here. They were safe. They were in the NICU because they were preemies. But they were safe. They were both stable. I was on cloud 9. Mm-hmm. Everything was so great. My husband FaceTimed me from the NICU. He went up with them. He FaceTimed me from the NICU, and I got to see them. And it was just wonderful. My tubes were tied during that C-section because I don't around with my health.
Right.
I'm not going to chance preeclampsia and HELLP syndrome again. No, thank you. I'm good.
Yeah.
So they had 21 and 22 day stay in the NICU respectively. They were born November 18th at 34 weeks on the nose, and they came home at December 5th and December 6th is when they came home. And I won't say it's been easy because there are 2 tiny babies that scream at me when they want food, and they tend to want food at the same time. It's not been easy, but it's wonderful to have them.
Not easy, but it's worth it.
Exactly. And out of all 6 of the pregnancies I knew what the gender was, I had 1 girl. She was born last. She was the last one out. I pity the poor fool whoever decides he wants to date her.
Exactly.
She's the baby of the family, and she's might only be the baby by a minute, but I have a feeling she is going to be well aware of it. It's ironic though, now she's bigger than her brother. They were both born at 4 pounds 6 ounces and 17 inches long. There was no difference in nutrients there. They were sharing pretty equally. And it has been kind of hard because Jensen and Mason are identical. And then Maven even does resemble Jensen a little bit, but Maven resembles me a little bit more. And so it took a while. At first, we were both, me and my husband, called Mason Jensen a lot. Those were the moments where we just kind of sat down and just used those moments for our grief, because there is a grief that comes with having a rainbow.
Mm-hmm.
Again, grief and joy are walking hand in hand. And I think that's going to be a lot of our life for the rest of it. There was a lot of tears, a lot of crying, a lot of moments where I didn't think I could do it. But at the end of the day, I did. And to anyone else who's going through pregnancy after loss, you can do it too. If I could say anything to Jensen, it'd be pretty simple. It'd be, I miss you, bud. And I love you. And I hope you're enjoying the snuggles from my grandparents. And I'll see you again.